Nigeria sits on 37 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. It holds the largest natural gas reserves on the African continent. Its GDP is the largest in Africa. And in June 2026, the First Lady of that country, standing inside the presidential villa in Abuja, told struggling Nigerians that the path forward is selling Akara, roasting corn, and producing Kulikuli. Now, here is the question nobody is asking loudly enough. Is this a communication failure? A well-meaning woman who spoke carelessly in a press briefing? Or does this statement reveal something far more deliberate about how this administration actually conceives of poverty, economic aspiration, and the relationship between the Nigerian state and its citizens? Stay with us, because what happened in that briefing room was not just a gaffe, it was a window. And what it revealed about the economic philosophy of the renewed hope agenda, that is what this video is about. Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, welcome. Naija Insight Desk exists for one reason, to give you the kind of analysis that goes beyond the headlines and the noise. Subscribe now, because this conversation is about to get deeper. On Wednesday, the 25th of June 2026, Nigeria's First Lady, Senator Remi Tinubu, hosted the wives of the 36 state governors at the presidential villa in Abuja, the second quarter meeting of the Renewed Hope Initiative. After that meeting, she addressed State House correspondents. She spoke about grants her office had been distributing to vulnerable Nigerians. And in explaining what those grants were meant to fund, she said this, and these are her words on camera. "We're trying to give hope. To start Akara business doesn't take a lot of money. To roast corn and kulikuli doesn't take much. We didn't give them a loan, we gave them a grant." A video of those remarks, later amplified by News Channel 247, went viral within hours. By Friday, the 27th, it had become one of the most discussed moments in Nigerian public life in recent memory. Now, before we analyze the politics, we need to establish the context. This was not a random comment. It was made at a structured government event in front of journalists representing the official framing of a federal empowerment program. The Renewed Hope Initiative is not a charity. It is a flagship social investment vehicle of this administration, operating out of the office of the First Lady with state-level governors' wives as implementing partners. So this was not a slip, this was the message. And the timing is significant. This statement landed at the precise moment that the World Bank's April 2026 Nigeria Development Update confirmed that Nigeria's poverty rate had climbed to 63%, roughly 140 million Nigerians living below the poverty line. That is not a legacy figure, that is a measurement under this administration. We'll come back later to what that 63% poverty figure actually means for the Akara argument, because the numbers tell a story that the First Lady's office has not addressed. To understand why this moment matters institutionally, we need to ask a precise question. What is the Renewed Hope Initiative, and what mandate does it actually carry? The Renewed Hope Initiative is a social investment program operating under the Office of the First Lady. It is not a statutory body, it has no constitutional basis, no independent legislative appropriation, no formal accountability structure to the National Assembly. Its resources, activities, and grant distribution processes are determined largely at the discretion of the Office of the First Lady. This is not unusual in Nigeria. Predecessor First Ladies operated similar foundations. But the scale of ambition attached to the Renewed Hope Initiative is different. It has been presented as a central pillar of this administration's poverty reduction strategy. And that is where the institutional problem begins. Poverty reduction in a constitutional democracy is a federal responsibility, executed through the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Budget and Planning, the National Social Investment Program, and the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission's asset recovery frameworks, among others. What is the relationship between the Renewed Hope Initiative and those statutory bodies? That question has never been clearly answered in public. What we know is this: the grants being distributed through this initiative are, by the First Lady's own description, small scale, enough to start a micro-food enterprise. There is no published figure for total disbursement, there is no publicly accessible audit of beneficiary selection, there is no third-party verification of outcomes. And here is the institutional tension at the heart of this story. Nigeria has a Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. It has a Small and Medium Enterprise Development Agency, SMEDAN. It has the Bank of Industry with a mandate to finance enterprise at scale. It has a central bank with development finance windows. The question critics are raising is not whether Akara is a legitimate business. It is whether a country with that institutional infrastructure should have its flagship empowerment narrative centered on micro-grants for street food distributed through a non-statutory office with no public accountability framework. That is a governance question, and it's a fair one.
Now, let us be precise about the political terrain in which this statement landed, because context determines whether this is negligence or calculation. June 2026 is 11 months from the official start of the 2027 election season. The Tinubu administration is managing a complicated political environment: fuel subsidy removal backlash that has not fully resolved, a naira that lost significant value in 2023 and 2024, and a poverty rate that has worsened on their watch by every credible external measurement. The Renewed Hope Initiative and events like the Governor's Wives Meeting serve a dual function. First, they are genuine social intervention vehicles. Small grants do reach some beneficiaries, and micro-enterprise support is not inherently wrong. Second, and critically, they are political mobilization infrastructure. The Governor's Wives Network is not a philanthropic network, it is a APC political network in many of those states. Distributing empowerment grants through that network in the lead-up to 2027 is also voter outreach. So, when the First Lady frames Akara as a symbol of renewed hope, she is doing something specific. She is validating the lives of the millions of Nigerians who already sell Akara, roast corn, and produce Kulikuli, and she is telling them that this government sees them, supports them, and has given them something. That is a political message wrapped in a development narrative. The backlash, however, reveals that the message has badly misfired in two directions simultaneously. Among the middle class and the educated, including graduates, professionals, and the diaspora, Akara framing read as an insult. One viral tweet asked, "After graduating with second class in electrical engineering, Remi Tinubu said I should start selling roasted corn?" That captures a real and legitimate frustration. A generation that was promised industrialization, diversification, and formal sector employment, and is being told instead to enter the informal survival economy. Among the very poor themselves, the women the grants are supposed to reach, the economics do not hold. Critics who know the informal sector argue that even businesses traditionally considered low capital, like Akara frying, now require meaningfully more startup investment because of inflation in bean prices, cooking gas, firewood, and trading space. The cost of surviving in the survival economy has itself inflated. Who is conspicuously silent? The formal economic policy apparatus, the Ministry of Finance, the Central Bank, the Ministry of Industry. None of them has publicly responded to the Akara conversation or used it as an entry point to communicate a broader economic strategy. That silence is itself communicative. Now, if what you just heard challenges what you thought you knew, drop it in the comments. I want to hear your read on this before we get to the part that reframes everything. Let us return to that World Bank figure because it does specific damage to the Akara argument. According to the World Bank's April 2026 Nigeria Development Update, Nigeria's poverty rate reached 63% in 2025, approximately 140 million people below the poverty line. The report explicitly notes that this increase happened even as inflation began to decline. Why? Because in the World Bank's own language, growth has been concentrated in services and industry, while agriculture, where more than half of Nigeria's poor are employed, has lagged significantly. This is the structural problem that the Akara solution does not address. Nigeria's poor are not poor because they lack the idea to sell street food. Millions of them are already in the informal economy, selling akara, roasting corn, trading in markets. What they lack is purchasing power in that economy, access to credit at reasonable rates, insulation from inflation in their input costs, and a pathway out of informality into something that builds capital across generations. The World Bank's lead economist for Nigeria, Fiseha Haile, said at the report's launch that reducing poverty in Nigeria depends not only on economic growth, but on the quality of that growth, specifically its ability to create jobs and raise incomes among the most vulnerable. Micro-grants for micro-enterprises do not constitute that quality of growth. They are at best a short-term cushion. At worst, they are a political instrument that displaces pressure for structural reform. There is a broader national implication here as well. Nigeria is a country with one of the largest youth populations on earth, and a youth unemployment crisis that formal sector growth has not kept pace with. The aspirational contract between the Nigerian state and its young people has always been fragile. When the most visible empowerment message from the First Lady's office is centered on subsistence trade, it does not disappoint, it signals a ceiling. And signals matter. Here is the number that reframes the entire conversation. According to the World Bank, an additional 10 million Nigerians fell into extreme poverty in 2025 alone under this administration. The Akara grant program did not slow that trajectory. The comparison that critics are reaching for internationally is instructive, and it deserves honest scrutiny rather than dismissal. Across Africa, there is a visible range in how first families and governments frame economic aspiration. Rwanda, for example, under Paul Kagame, has built its international brand around technology, services exports, and positioning Kigali as a continental business hub. The criticism of that model is about political repression, not economic ambition. Ethiopia's government has aggressively pursued manufacturing investment and industrial park development. Ghana's government, despite significant debt difficulties, has consistently framed its empowerment narrative around formal job creation and the middle class. These are not perfect models, but the point critics are making, and it is a legitimate analytical point, is about the register of aspiration. What does a government's flagship empowerment message tell you about what that government believes its citizens are capable of and what they believe they deserve? For the Nigerian diaspora in the UK, the United States, Canada, and South Africa, this moment has particular resonance. Many Nigerian diasporans left precisely because the formal economy at home could not absorb them. When the First Lady's message reaches them via viral video, what they hear is not encouragement, they hear confirmation of the gap between what Nigeria promises and what it delivers. There is also an international optics dimension. Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa, a member of the G20 outreach process, and a country that under multiple administrations has sought to position itself as a continental leader. The viral Akara video has circulated beyond Nigeria's borders. It has been picked up by commentary platforms across West Africa. What it projects about Nigeria's development ambitions is a question the Tinubu administration will need to answer. One commentator framed it this way, and it's worth sitting with. An oil-producing nation should not be discussing Kulikuli and Akara as means of survival. That is not mockery of the businesses. That is a question about the ambition of the state.
Let us be honest about the strongest arguments on the other side, because the critics are not entirely right either. The most credible defense of the First Lady's position goes like this. Informal micro-enterprises employ tens of millions of Nigerians, particularly women, who are excluded from the formal economy. The street food sector is not marginal. It is, for many communities, the primary economic ecosystem. A government that ignores that sector or treats it as beneath policy attention would also be failing the poor. Small grants that enable women to start or sustain those businesses are real interventions with real beneficiaries.
And the framing of Akara business doesn't take much was arguably directed at that specific audience, grant recipients in an empowerment program, not at engineers or university graduates looking for formal employment. That is a fair point, and it matters for how we evaluate the First Lady's intent. But here is where the counter-argument runs out of road. Intent and outcome are not the same thing. Even if the message was meant for a specific audience in that room, it was delivered in front of State House correspondents and filmed. The First Lady of Nigeria is a public official with a national platform. The message that reaches the country is the message on camera. More importantly, the criticism is not primarily about whether Akara should be supported. It is about whether Akara is the ceiling, whether this is the administration's highest ambition for the people it governs. And nothing in the Renewed Hope Initiative's public communications has convincingly answered that charge. The most common misconception circulating is that critics are mocking street food sellers or looking down on informal labor. The most coherent criticism, captured by one widely shared tweet, draws the distinction precisely. Nobody is mocking Akara, roasted corn, or Kulikuli. Those are honest businesses. The problem is that Nigerians are asking for a better economy, more jobs, and lower prices. That is the argument, and it deserves a policy response, not a PR response. Rufai Useni, a prominent broadcaster, asked the sharpest question of the week. If selling Akara leads to Aso Rock, why didn't she start? Now that is pointed commentary, not policy, but the underlying question it poses is legitimate. What does the aspiration of the people in power tell us about the aspiration they hold for the people they govern? 3 moves to watch from here. First, the Tinubu administration will almost certainly move to reframe this story through formal economic policy messaging. Expect announcements around the Bank of Industry, SMIDAN, or the Ministry of Industry in the coming weeks that emphasize larger-scale enterprise support. Whether those announcements are backed by disbursable capital or remain aspirational is the thing to watch. Second, opposition actors, including the Labour Party, the PDP, and the recently disrupted NDC coalition, will use this moment as 2027 campaign material. The Akara video is already being edited into political content across social media. Watch for this to escalate specifically if the NBS releases new unemployment or poverty data before the end of Q3 2026. Third, watch the Renewed Hope Initiative's response. If they publish transparency data, beneficiary numbers, grant amounts, geographic distribution, outcome metrics, that changes the conversation. If they do not, the gap between the program's claims and its verifiable record will continue to widen. The 12-month political impact heavily depends on one variable: whether the economy produces visible improvement in household purchasing power before the 2027 campaigns. Macroeconomic indicators have improved on paper. Inflation has declined significantly from its 2024 peak, but as the World Bank noted, those improvements have not yet translated into lived experience for people at the bottom of the income distribution. If they do not before the election season, the Akara moment will become a fixed reference point in the opposition's 2027 narrative. The 3-year trajectory is more structural. Nigeria's poverty reduction depends on what the World Bank called the quality of growth, its ability to create formal sector jobs and raise agricultural incomes. None of those are quick wins, and the political calendar does not favor long-term structural investment. Earlier, we asked whether the Akara statement was a communication failure or something more deliberate. Here's the honest answer. It's probably both, and that's more troubling than either alone. It was careless communication, And it was also a sincere expression of how this administration's social investment apparatus is actually structured: microgrants managed through a non-statutory office for subsistence-level enterprise. The carelessness and the philosophy are not separate, they are the same thing. We opened with a question: is this about a communication failure, or does it reveal something deeper about this administration's economic philosophy? The evidence doesn't let us settle easily on either answer. The Renewed Hope initiative does support real people. Small grants do matter to women who receive them. Akara is not a joke. It is, for millions of Nigerians, survival. The First Lady did not create the poverty she was trying to address. But what researchers and development economists consistently argue, and what the World Bank's own Nigeria data confirms, is that grant-funded micro-enterprise support operating through non-statutory channels without public accountability is not a poverty reduction strategy. It is a poverty management strategy, and there is a profound difference between the two. Managing poverty means keeping people in the informal survival economy. Reducing poverty means creating the conditions under which they can leave it. Nigeria, as an analyst might put it, needs both. The question this moment forces onto the table is which one this government is actually building, and whether Nigerians in 2027 will hold it accountable for the answer. That thread stays open. Watch the data, watch the policy moves, and watch what the Renewed Hope initiative chooses to publish or not publish about where the grants actually went. If this analysis gave you clarity, not agreement, clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.